Hello, Hidden Gems. It is Lauren and John, and we are reporting not from Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was going to fly home tomorrow for John's birthday and anniversary, but I just wanted to be here with John, and I found a flight, and I didn't tell you, and took an Uber from the airport, and here we are together in the same house, different rooms, for the split screen, but I did surprise my family, because of that, dismissal of a case, a history-making moment in the trial of Alec Baldwin. His case has been dismissed. I was in the courtroom every day, and by every day, I mean 4 days if you count jury selection. Every day, guys, 4 whole days, it lasted, and I was there, and it was dismissed on day 3, yesterday. So I'm back home. Happy birthday tomorrow, babe. What
Thank
else
you.
is tomorrow?
I'm,
I already said.
I already
I
have
already shared, I know,
I
I
already
know.
have an early present with you coming through the door 2 hours ago. So I'm glad you're home. We're both glad. Your son and myself are glad you're home. We're excited to see you, and especially to help, just celebrate and be here with us. And it felt like much longer than a week. I don't know why, but this one
It did.
this one
I
this
agree.
one felt like an eternity. I'm not sure why, but um maybe the days felt longer in Vegas because it was like 119 for 3 days in a row or something. I think I was a little disoriented.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm just glad that I have taken care of your birthday gift because I showed up. So this year, your birthday gift is me. Sorry, I didn't
Yeah,
have
no,
time for anything else. I actually
that's
didn't even
good. Yeah,
I didn't think I would be seeing you for your birthday. I thought I would be in New Mexico, so I'm glad to be
yeah,
here, babe.
me too. I thought you were coming home late tomorrow, but um, so yeah, I'm glad you're here. And that, by the way, that's why we're running a little bit late tonight.
I had to
Lauren just
unpack all of my equipment. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, right. You had to unpack. You just came through the door 2 hours ago, so we're just trying to pull this together. But thanks everyone for joining us. We're gonna talk about this amazing conclusion to this case and what happened and why it happened, I think. And you were there. You were sitting in the courtroom for this moment. Do you want to talk a little bit about your experience of what happened?
Yeah. Yeah, what part? My goodness. It was a trial I will never forget, and not because it was a celebrity, because of what happened every day in the courtroom, especially the last day. You know, we all said as much to Jesse Weber on News Nation last night. We were all wondering if Alec Baldwin might testify. Nobody was asking whether or not the prosecutor, Carrie Morrissey, would be testifying, but that is exactly what happened. She called herself at the very end of a wild day to the stand, which Alec Baldwin's defense team okayed. Alex Spiro was Alec Baldwin's main defense attorney, and then that was wild. That was a wild cross examination. We had one prosecutor resigning on that third day, walking out and resigning from the case, or Linda Johnson. Nobody knew until it was announced
Yeah, I
during the
mean,
testimony.
you had the judge. I was watching at home. You had the judge putting on gloves and examining the evidence, which I've never seen. I mean, it was
Nor
just
have
one
I.
series. Yeah, it was just one series of moments after another until the case was finally dismissed.
Right. I had never seen that either. The judge putting on gloves, opening up evidence, examining the bullets, and then when she put the bullets down, having the prosecutor, Carrie Morrissey, pick them up with her bare hands, and then have the defense attorney say, "Why doesn't she, put those down?" And her response is, "These have been rolling around for 3 years." I'm fine. I mean,
which it wasn't, by the way, but okay.
also, just the all the language that was used in court and by witnesses, I was like, "Man, we're not in Daybell anymore." We're not in Judge
Right.
Boyce's courtroom anymore.
Yeah, this wasn't Judge Boyce and the Rob Wood and the prosecution team that were so deferential and right, so modest. This was a different type of prosecutor here. I was joking with you when you came in. I said this was like Hollywood meets the Wild West, right? I felt like the tension between the judge and the prosecutor was like a standoff, like a Western standoff, like High Noon or something, where they were going head to head. I thought they were going to put on holsters and pull out some prop guns. So it was crazy. The drama was amazing for this type of trial.
The drama was amazing. I was gasping and shocked so many times, whether sitting in the courtroom or the press room. I would go between the two, because I could have my, equipment and phone in the press room and be sharing notes with other reporters, and then up in the courtroom. And I want to say too, there was some, I sat behind Alec Baldwin and his family most days, and his sister was there. Stephen Baldwin, his brother, was there. His wife Hilaria was there, and they were very kind and supportive. And I really humanized Alec Baldwin for me as well. His sister Beth, or Elizabeth, is a very kind woman and spoke to us and shared some really touching stories. And she herself is a mother of 6, as well as a grandmother to Minnie. And she just broke down in tears when this case was dismissed. I imagine that this has been weighing on the family for so long. And before I begin everything, because it's wild, and I went live. John hasn't even seen my YouTube lives, but I went live yesterday after the case was dismissed, sort of feeling relief and gratitude for the Baldwin family. And I didn't mention Helena Hutchins in that live because it didn't feel right, because and I wrote this much on my private Instagram account today. I said, I ache for Helena Hutchins' family. I'm happy for the Baldwin family that they can put this behind them, but I ache for Helena Hutchins' family, and she absolutely deserves justice. And I think one question I kept bringing up in my YouTube lives is, what does justice look like? I don't know, but I will say this: that justice begins with a really good investigation, and a better investigation by authorities, and not hiding evidence, and maybe finding out exactly where those live rounds came from that killed her. And let's start with that. And so one thing I want to talk to you a little bit more to later on this show, John, is what justice perhaps does look like for Helena Hutchins, or those that lose their lives due to accidents and negligence. And she should absolutely still be alive, and it breaks my heart for her family.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting elements of this case is this question of justice, because clearly someone was killed, and
And their
a
family
wonderful,
deserves peace.
right, and so yeah, I think it's one of the one of the interesting videos you posted was, you were after the case was dismissed and people were exiting the press. You saw the press chasing the lead prosecutor, Carrie Morrissey, and
Mhm.
one of the questions they kept asking her is, do you think that you failed in getting justice for Helena Hutchins' family?
That was what they kept
And
asking her.
they
Yeah.
kept asking her that, right? And I was just amazed by that, because while I think it's a reasonable question, I think it's a little misguided, and we'll talk about that tonight. But I mean, it's because I'm not sure nobody wins here.
Nobody.
And nobody wins. And her family doesn't, the Baldwin family doesn't. I mean, even though he's acquitted, Alec Baldwin I talked about this last week. You know, in 2021, when he did the interview with George Stephanopoulos, he was showing symptoms of PTSD, and I think he's going to have to live his entire life knowing that he killed another human being. Even if it was an accident, he's still going to have to bear the weight of that. And I think for somebody like Alec Baldwin, who does have a lot of empathy, that's going to be difficult. So you could argue that, you know, you could argue that the way to punish someone is to send them to prison for 18 months. But I would argue that in this particular case, if we call this an accident, that it's a more severe punishment to have a death weigh upon you for the rest of your life. And he, you know, he talked about being close to Helena. He met with the husband after, and her son after the incident. So he was quite responsive, and he was quite empathic, and he was quite remorseful. In fact, he made the husband producer of the Rust movie, which was completed. So there was also a settlement where, you know, it's undisclosed, but there was some money paid out to Matthew, the husband, as well. So, you know, and we'll talk more. I'll try to break down my opinion of what I felt like, what I believe that what happened here. And we'll try to go a little deeper in terms of the psychological components of this case. And that's really my goal tonight. So,
Yeah. And to McSpunky, who says, and I don't know who you're responding to. I don't know what they said because the chat's going really fast, guys. I'm not seeing all of the comments, but I just love that statement. So I want to say this here because this is a case with varying opinions that we can all agree to disagree here, and all opinions matter here, and they're welcome. Let's all just remain respectful. Thank you, McSpunky, for being here. Yeah. But yeah. Yeah, so I do want to say this. You're right. So Helena Hutchins' husband was made the executive producer when Rust was finished and it was concluded, and he was part of that.
right.
I did have an interview with Gloria Allred to speak, and she spoke on behalf of Helena Hutchins' parents. Those are her clients, and she was attorney. Gloria Allred was every day in court representing them, and she gave me a 10-minute interview. And so to speak on behalf of Helena Hutchins, what Gloria Allred told me was that Alec Baldwin should not be above the law. I agree with her there. No celebrity should ever be above the law. No politician, no one should be above the law. And that she did hope that Alec Baldwin would call Helena Hutchins' parents, that while he had called her husband, he had not yet called her parents. And I'm just stating that because I feel like I need to just share that from Gloria Allred. But we will, yes, let's get started.
Yeah, that was one of the criticisms. So but he actually met. He didn't call Matthew, the husband.
Right.
He met with them, and he's actually met with them multiple times. So
I worked with him now on the innocent Rust. Correct.
So let's talk a little bit about, let me try to break down what I feel were the primary arguments here. So I think one way to understand a case like this is to look at the different theories of the case. And so the defense has a theory of the case, and the prosecution has a theory of the case. And I think we can gain a lot of insights by really trying to understand what those theories of the cases were. Mm-hmm. Obviously the trial's over, but so let's start with the prosecution. You know, I think to understand this case, you really have to kind of reach back in time to Greek tragedy. So I think if you go back like 2,400 years to Greek tragedy, and you think of kind of Aristotle's ideas about Greek tragedy, I would label the prosecution's case a case, what I would call a case of the tragic hero. And the reason I would do that is because Aristotle had this idea of that tragedy often involved a hero, a tragic hero, who was typically kind of undone by certain actions that he or she would engage in. And most tragic heroes had something what he called hamartia. And hamartia is now referred to as a fatal flaw. So a lot of, and I'm oversimplifying Aristotle a lot here for the purposes of our podcast, but most tragic heroes exhibit a fatal flaw. And for Aristotle, one of the primary fatal flaws of most tragic heroes, if not all, was hubris. And when tragic heroes were hubristic or showed hubris, back then the term was hybris, oftentimes that type of behavior attracted the hostility of the gods. So in other words, there was always kind of this clash in Greek tragedy between humans and gods. You know, obviously the Greek gods were quite different than what we know of today, but you had this clash, and oftentimes this clash was driven by hubris because humans in some cases believed that they were on a par with the gods. So if you could play that clip of Carrie Morrissey, this is during the Hannah Gutierrez Reed trial, but she had this to say about Alec Baldwin back then.
Referenced Alec Baldwin in a very interesting way.
The defense. Alec Baldwin is to blame for acting like a prima donna on the movie set and bossing people around. This is Hollywood, for heaven's sakes. I would imagine that's relatively common. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that his conduct was right. I am the person who indicted him.
Okay.
Alec Baldwin's conduct.
Okay.
So here you have, during this previous trial, here you have the lead prosecutor essentially calling Alec Baldwin a prima donna. And again, if I go back to this idea of Greek tragedy, this is clearly related to this idea of hubris. And so you have, in this case, you have the taking of a life, which typically, if you go back to the Greeks, usually the taking of a life is reserved for the gods. And so you, in many ways, you have, in this case, you have a situation where you have a tragic hero potentially who's hubristic, as, you know, some history of hubris, and, you know, some would argue, including the prosecutor, who takes a life, and at least in her mind's eye, she doesn't see him as being held accountable for that. So what happens in these types of situations in Greek tragedy oftentimes is that the tragic hero with this fatal flaw is sacrificed. So this is where the term scapegoat comes from. The tragic hero gets sacrificed to appease the gods and to make it clear that the gods have power over mortals, right? And so the term that was often used to refer to these types of situations is that, you know, the tragic hero would serve as a bit of a scapegoat and for the community, not just to appease the gods, but also to show that the tragic hero wasn't godlike, that the tragic hero was human. It was an attempt, I think, in Greek culture at least, to show that by blaming the tragic hero, which is what happens with the scapegoat. So the scapegoat gets blamed for whatever the crime is or the, you know, situation is, and the tragic hero gets punished, rightly or wrongly. And part of that, I think, has to do with this attempt to bring the tragic hero down to earth, right? To kind of get the tragic hero to become more human. And we saw, if you could play kind of that last moment where, so there was an extraordinary moment in this trial where ALEC Spiro is cross-examining Carrie Morrissey towards the end, and ALEC Spiro, he knows that he has the prosecutor off balance a little bit. He senses that the judge is probably going to side with him, so he smells blood in the water, and he comes in my opinion, he smells blood in the water, and he kind of comes in for the kill to make this whole thing personal. And he starts trying to reveal Carrie Morrissey's actual motivations for bringing this prosecution. And it's an amazing moment, because rarely are you going to get a lead prosecutor on the stand who's going to be subjected to these types of questions. And what's one of the interesting elements of this is that Carrie Morrissey is really caught off guard here. She doesn't really answer. She doesn't say no, that they're not true, because she knows that ALEC Spiro has corroborating people or evidence or statements from people showing that she actually said these things. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Some of this
go ahead.
Okay. Some of this language is a little colorful, so I'm not sure what we can run here, but
again, we're not in Judge Boyce's courtroom anymore. So for those that have seen this, and for those that haven't, we're not bleeping it. So there you go. There's your warning. All right.
The truth of this matter is, you don't like Mr. Baldwin very much, do you?
That is absolutely untrue. I actually really appreciate Mr. Baldwin's movies. I really appreciated the acting that he did on Saturday Night Live, and I really appreciate his politics.
You told one of the witnesses who disagreed with you during an interview that you thought Mr. Baldwin was a cocksucker.
I do not recall saying that. I know that was something that Mr. Baldwin would say on the set of Rust. I don't recall saying that.
Do you deny that under oath?
Without having more information, I can tell you that I do not recall ever saying that. And if I did say it, I invite you to point it out to me.
You called him an arrogant prick to another witness.
To who? To what witness?
I'm asking you, did you call him an arrogant prick during a witness interview?
I don't believe I did. I don't recall.
Do you deny that?
Without knowing what you're talking about, all I can tell you is that I can't respond if I don't know what you're talking about.
And you said also to witnesses that you would teach him a lesson.
I never said to witnesses that I would teach him a lesson. Absolutely not. In fact, Mr. Spiro, I want to give a full response to your question. I made every effort in this case to resolve this case with your client in a very favorable way for him.
All right, I'm going to move to strike this. It's not responsive.
It is responsive.
I don't want to talk about plea negotiations.
Yeah, and it's not responsive. So I have no further
All right,
questions.
do you have any follow-up testimony? All right.
I want to
Okay.
say I have no recollection of
That was a wild moment. We
Yeah,
were
a wild.
gasping. Yeah.
Yeah, an incredible moment. But what I want to point out here is, if I'm thinking about this in terms of the tragic hero narrative that the prosecution is trying to develop, and which is about hubris, the most important moment of all of yesterday was said there, which is she denied it, but ALEC Spiro has it. He has proof, corroborating evidence that she said it. Her goal was to teach him a lesson. And that is why in Greek tragedy, scapegoats exist. The goal is to bring the tragic hero back down to earth and to teach them a lesson. the reason you have a scapegoat, the reason you assign blame, well, it's you blame the tragic hero because the tragic hero has the fatal flaw. And the goal is you have the sacrificial component to appease the anger of the community and to teach the tragic hero a lesson. And that's exactly what's going on here. I think you've got this huge element of scapegoating. I think that you're blaming someone who may have had some responsibility. You could argue that he was somewhat reckless with the way he handled his firearm. You could argue a lot of things. You could argue that he pulled the trigger. They wanted to argue all of that. But the bottom line is, as the defense pointed out, and as Alec Baldwin has said repeatedly, if you hand him a cold gun, there's no fatality here.
Right.
Right. The evidence shows that if, putting all else aside, the real question here is what leads to Helena's death? It's the bullet. Alec Baldwin didn't know there was a live round in the gun. He didn't load the gun. He believed it was a cold gun, right? So everything else is blaming. They're blaming him because, in my opinion, they're blaming him because there's so much grief over this loss. And there's so much rage over this loss. So that's another element of Greek tragedy that oftentimes, if you think about a play like Antigone by Sophocles, it's all about grief. So Antigone loses her brother and she can't bury him, and she's enraged. She's enraged because she has this grief and she doesn't know what to do with it. And this is a case where, like Greek tragedy, you have this grief, but nobody knows what to do with it. And you have this rage because no one knows what to do with that grief. So they point the finger at, in my opinion, they're pointing the finger at Alec Baldwin and saying, look what you did. You mishandled this gun. You pulled the trigger. You were irresponsible. You were, a prima donna. They're all trying to blame him. They're all trying to scapegoat him, I think. With this illusion that somehow by displacing their rage and grief onto Alec Baldwin, that somehow they're going to reverse this loss. Once there's a tragic loss, there's no reversing it. But that's where the scapegoat comes in. So the scapegoat serves this important role for the community in the sense that this is another Aristotle term. The scapegoat allows the community to experience a catharsis, catharsis means an emotional release. So if you blame someone, if you blame the tragic hero and you scapegoat the tragic hero for whatever the tragic action is, then in theory, the community can experience some catharsis, even if that tragic hero wasn't responsible for whatever transpired. But by blaming the individual, by creating a scapegoat, you're able to, in some ways, you're able to assist the community in processing their trauma and their rage and their grief. And I think that's what's happening here. I mean, you've got a combination of a scapegoat and an overzealous prosecutor, a prosecutor who also, by the way, shows a lot of hubris. So if she thinks Alec Baldwin's a prima donna, and I don't know Carrie Morrissey, but I will say this, in watching the 3 days of the trial, that Carrie Morrissey appears to me to be very angry, and she appears arrogant to me. I mean, to take the stand under oath when basically the judge and the lead defense attorney, Alex Spiro, telling her, I don't think you want to do this. They're basically pleading with her not to take the stand. And she says, I don't care, I'm taking the stand. I don't care what you guys think. I'm gonna show you that I'm right. I'm gonna show you that this case should not be dismissed under any circumstances because I want to teach Alec Baldwin a lesson. Just like the gods in Greek tragedy want to teach the tragic hero a lesson. It's to bring the tragic hero to his or her knees. That's what she wants to do. She wants to take this elite, famous actor who happened to show up in her small town where someone was killed on a movie set, and she wants to bring him down to earth. She wants to bring him to his knees. Maybe to some degree, she wants to humiliate him. Right? It's the same dynamics you see in Greek tragedy. But the fatal flaw, according to the prosecution, is hubris. And so you get these Aristotelian ideas of tragedy showing up here. The fatal flaw, the scapegoat, the catharsis for the community. In fact, if you could play, you did an interview with your Uber driver early on. We'll call him Uber Joe.
Uber Joe?
Uber Joe, do you have that clip of Uber Joe?
I do.
Okay.
I do. Let me play that.
I'm going to go check and my Uber driver is a local Santa Fe resident, and he said it's really important that we get to know how those in Santa Fe feel. First name
Joe.
This is Joe. He is my Uber driver and local in Santa Fe. What are your thoughts? Oh yeah, pull over so you feel safe. They're telling you to leave, aren't they?
Yeah. So most of the locals here in Santa Fe are really upset that a man could shoot and kill a woman and not spend an hour in jail. Any of the local people that would have shot and killed somebody would have been handcuffed, put in jail for several days. He didn't have to do anything but go down to the police department and cry like a baby about what happened. Placing the blame on the ammo lady, the young lady, he seems to have placed all the blame on her. She didn't pull the trigger. He did. He still denies it, and he'll deny it till the end. So, understandably, people in Santa Fe here that kill somebody, they go to jail for a while. He didn't go to jail at all. So this is really important to the people of Santa Fe to be sure that justice is equal across the board, no matter who you are.
So Uber Joe let's see Uber Joe as the equivalent of the chorus in Greek tragedy. So the chorus represents the community. They're speaking for the community. And Uber Joe is basically arguing something similar, that Alec Baldwin is getting preferential treatment. He needs to be brought down to earth. He needs to spend some time in jail. But it's the same thing. What Uber Joe is essentially saying is, we in the Santa Fe community, the chorus, the jury, we need a catharsis because we are also grieving over this loss that happened in our backyard. We're also enraged by this loss, and we need him, no matter what the evidence. Notice that Uber Joe doesn't talk about the evidence. He just says he should spend time in jail or prison. Right? Uber Joe's neglecting any of the nuances of this case. He's just saying, I won't feel any type of closure or resolution until this high-flying actor, Hollywood actor, is brought to his knees and spends time in prison or jail. He's saying something similar. He's not exactly giving the tragic hero, he's not espousing the tragic hero narrative that the prosecution is, but he's saying something similar. He's saying our community can't heal from this without putting this guy in jail. The problem with that argument is it doesn't look at the evidence. And so which takes me to my next step. Let's look at the defense's argument.
And I do want to say this too. I just want to interrupt for just a second before you jump to that. The people in New Mexico were hurting from this, and they still are because of the botched investigation and the botched prosecution. I want you to know that too. The local New Mexico reporters were ashamed of how things went to. They're like, this makes New Mexico look really bad. But New Mexico has been broken by this. The number one thing in Santa Fe right now for their economy is this growing film industry. They want it to be safe. They're hurting. So I just want to, yes, that was my take from those in New Mexico. Not everybody agreed with Uber Joe, but I think that it's been very hard for New Mexico, the residents in New Mexico. Go ahead, John.
So let me, I'm going to explain the defense's position now. So I think the prosecution has this narrative that this is what I would refer to as kind of the tragic hero narrative, that here you have this Hollywood actor, obviously, that's arrogant. He's displaying hubris on the set. And as Carrie Morrissey said, he needs to be taught a lesson. So we need to blame him. Our community needs a catharsis, right? But let's look at the other side. Let's look at the defense's argument. The defensive argument is that Helena Hutchins' death was an accident. Their argument was, not only was it an accident, but there was no one to blame. So it's the antithesis of the scapegoat argument. And, you know, if I'm still thinking about Greek thought here, essentially this is the polarity. These two arguments are the polarity in Greek thought between chance and fate. So the tragic hero oftentimes is brought back down to earth because of fate, because of certain actions that are fatalistic. In other words, they're inevitable. So like in Alec Baldwin's case, you'd have to say that the bullet and all the incidents leading up to the fatal shooting had this element of fate, that they were unavoidable, and that they demonstrated that things could not have been otherwise. And so again, I think that's implicit in the prosecution's argument. But the defense is saying something quite different, which is this is chance. This is chance alone. And as we talked about last week, the chance is human beings struggle with accidents. Human beings struggle with chance because we want to think that the world is meaningful and that there's clear patterns that we can see. We want to assign. We want to make sense of the world. We want to be in control of the world. We want to assign meaning to things. And if things are purely random or purely based on chance, we can't do that. So in many ways, like the defense argument is contrary. This whole idea of a scapegoat, it runs so deep in human nature. Communities need scapegoats to coalesce around tragedy. They struggle with calling something chance. They struggle with something that's a pure accident. And the reason they do that is because if you're not blaming someone, then you're not making sense of the world. You're not making it all add up. So inevitably, the prosecution's argument is more compelling to most people because it gives the community the basis to cope with and resolve potentially their anger and their grief and their rage, right? Whereas if you say something just happens by accident, you don't really have any way to cope with that rage and that grief. So I think that the defense's argument was always going to be a little bit of an uphill battle, because if you take the scapegoat argument versus chance, most people are going to want to see the scapegoat argument as being more compelling. The problem is that that's not what the evidence says, and this is what my job is. So however I feel about Alec Baldwin or this case, or the fact that Helena never should have lost her life, that it was a terrible tragedy, whatever my personal feelings are, I need to look past those and consider the evidence. And the evidence here is clear. The evidence is that somebody brought live rounds onto that set, and that was not Alec Baldwin. And somebody put a live round in that gun, that was not Alec Baldwin. That somebody handed Alec Baldwin a gun that was a hot gun when he thought it was a cold gun, And he shot that gun, no matter how negligent he was, he shot that gun believing that there was a blank or a dummy in the gun, and there wasn't. So in many ways, the defense argument was this was a pure accident. And by the way, Matthew Hutchins, the husband, he says the same thing. He agrees with Alec Baldwin. He agrees with the Baldwin family. He's quite sympathetic. He thinks this wasn't an accident. It was a tragic accident, but it was an accident. And so essentially the defense's argument is that the prosecution in their inept investigation, that the prosecution, because they were unable to track down the source of the live rounds, and because the prosecution was unable to figure out how those rounds got onto the set. And by the way, I don't think they had a chance to do that because you had all these characters like Seth Kenney that are really slippery, right? These guys aren't exactly the most honest people on the planet. I mean, I'm not saying that Seth Kenney perjured himself, but like when I say this is Hollywood meets the Wild West, I mean like these are characters like right out of the 1800s Wild West. Like these are like, right? These guys are like Troy, Troy Teskey, right? Just even their names, even their names could be like these
Bell
Wild
Reed.
West characters.
Yeah, Troy
Bell
Teskey,
Reed, right?
Seth
Bell Reed.
Kenney.
The reason, some of it's not the prosecution's fault because you have this cast of characters that like where there's no accountability whatsoever. These guys are just passing around live rounds from movie set to movie set. They don't know what the hell's going on.
Right.
There was a moment where Alex Spiro asked Seth Kenney, well, how many live rounds? So they were shooting 1883, which is the Yellowstone prequel in Texas, and Seth Kenney was supplying the ammunition for that movie, and they were doing off, I don't know, like 300 yards down the road, they were shooting live rounds to help the actors figure out what it was like to shoot live rounds, right? And Alex Spiro asked him, okay, what happened to the live rounds? And he says, well, I put them in the little green canister. And he says, well, okay, how many rounds did you have? 300. How many of those were live rounds? Maybe 50, maybe 100. Like 50 to 100. And I'm thinking, what? 50 to 100? Like you don't inventory your live rounds on a movie set? You just you just take a wild guess. Well, yeah, some were live, some weren't, We just we put some in the canister. We sent some up to Montana for Hannah's movie, The Hard Way, with Nicolas Cage. We sent some back to Arizona with Troy Teskey. We don't know. We just, it's live rounds. Who cares? Like these people.
I know. Was Nicolas Cage in trouble? Was he gonna be?
No, I know. I thought that was my first thought. I'm like, I'm glad Nicolas Cage wasn't, killed.
I'm glad he's alive. Yeah.
Like, holy cow! If I was an actor watching this whole trial, I would not want to be in a movie anymore with a prop gun or any ammunition, because these people, they don't know they don't know their inventory. They don't keep track they don't inventory every single bullet that could be live, nor do they separate it from the rounds that are not live. It's incredible. I kept thinking, why aren't there more fatalities on movie sets?
Right.
And so part of the reason, the prosecution was sloppy, to say the least. The prosecution was driven, I think. Carrie Morrissey was clearly overzealous. Carrie Morrissey really wanted to take down Alec Baldwin. I think it was driven by her arrogance, and I don't know if she's running for office, but her desire to maybe be in the spotlight to some degree. I'm not sure. I don't know exactly what her motivations are, but clearly she had this disdain for Alec Baldwin, and it factored into this. When you get a prosecutor who's in the limelight more than the star actor, when you get a prosecutor who's taking the stand and you don't even know if the defendant, the star actor, is going to take the stand, that's a problem. Right? Talk about hubris. She wanted to get up on the stand. You know, the irony is that in many ways, the prosecutor, I don't know her again, but the prosecutor seems to have this fatal flaw too. That she's driven by the same things that she's accusing Alec Baldwin of engaging in. She's right. And so that's, I think that was the total irony of this trial, is that she wants to bring him to his knees over his hubris, and she's just as arrogant.
Thank you. Yeah, I did sense a lot of projection in that. She's very arrogant. I think most people would agree, no matter what side you're on. Can we all agree with that? Could that be something we all agree on? And right, so it's interesting that she is always pointing out the arrogance of Alec Baldwin when I'm like,
right, and then the arrogance of the way they mishandled this evidence.
yes,
Somebody comes in with live rounds from Arizona. Troy Teskey comes in with live rounds and says, here, these are relevant, which, by the way, Kerry Morrissey denied that these live rounds match the live rounds on the set. That's not what Hannah Gutierrez Reed's attorney said. So since that statement, since she took the stand, he has said that's untrue, that the live rounds that Troy Teskey brought in matched the live rounds on the set. He's disputed that. So essentially, this attorney Bowles is accusing Kerry Morrissey of perjury by saying that I don't know whether she knew that or not. I don't know. She was clearly trying to save the case at the last minute.
right. Yeah, no, I know. Jumping on the stand was trying to save the case at the last minute too.
So, I mean, to me, I kept thinking, like, when they talked about these bullets. So, by the way, these bullets, to me, like, the real mystery here is the real mystery was trying to solve the trajectory of these bullets, trying to solve the origins and travels of these bullets. Like, who had this? What's the source of the bullets? How did they get to the set? Who brought them on the set? It was like a shell game. It was like a shell game with Hannah, Bell, Seth Kenny. Like, all these people had access to these bullets, and they kept moving them around. Now they're in Montana. Now they're in Arizona. Now they're in Texas. Now they're in New Mexico. Like, what are these people doing?
I know.
What the hell are they doing? And I mean, not only that, like, these are live rounds. These will kill people. Right. They did kill someone. So in that, right, they did kill someone. So in that, exactly. And so in that sense, and that's the tragedy. So in that sense, the defense had the much better argument. I think ultimately the defense would have prevailed, even if there was a full trial, even if the prosecution didn't hide evidence and suppress evidence. I think the defense would have prevailed. The accident, the chance argument that I've talked about is more difficult to make, but because it was so clear that these live rounds were just all over the place and they couldn't be accounted for, it was so clear that the prosecution needed a scapegoat because they couldn't figure it out. Ultimately, what they should have done was found the source of those live rounds, figured out how they got onto the set, right? I mean, we know that Hannah loaded the gun with one, but Hannah denied that she knew that. Hannah denied that Hannah denied putting a live round in the gun. So according to her, she didn't know that there were live rounds on the set. So how did they get there? That's the person that should be held accountable.
Agree. I said that actually on my live a couple days ago, my lunch live a couple days ago, or my afternoon live. Isn't that the issue? And I know that a lot of people are saying, well, we figured it out. It was Hannah. It was this person. We don't know.
Yeah, we still don't, like, it's not
We
clear
don't know.
cut. It's not,
No.
we still don't know. As we speak tonight, it's still a mystery where these live rounds came from, what states they traveled to. I mean, Hannah was convicted of involuntary manslaughter already, but I mean, she denies that she put a live round in the gun.
Right.
So I mean, it ultimately, it's still a mystery. And I mean, and so the prosecution really, I think the defense knew this. The prosecution really looked inept because they couldn't figure that out. And because they couldn't figure that out, in my opinion, I think that it was easier for them to point the finger at Alec Baldwin, this high profile actor. Let's find a scapegoat and let's blame him, and then we'll all feel better. We'll all feel like we've solved the problem. We can all get closure. We'll all, we'll all, by convicting him, in theory, like Joe said, we'll feel better because he spends time in prison, and he'll allow us, Alec Baldwin, the scapegoat, would allow us to really, in theory, it would allow the community to start resolving or coping with some of their anger and their grief over this entire situation.
Yeah. Really quickly, I pinned it, and we forgot to mention at the beginning of this that we are going to go live on Patreon with a Q&A for our Patreon gems right after this hit an hour. It's a little bit off topic. I apologize, but I was supposed to say that at the beginning of this, and I didn't. I pinned it in the comments or in the chat, and for the link, and then it's also in the description of this video, the link. If you guys want to join us for the live Patreon, or for those watching this later, you can go see that live Patreon. It'll remain, and you can watch it even when it's not live. All right. You can see it'll be there forever. Commercial break over, or let's call it, what do we call it? It's not a commercial break, but intermission. There you go. That was the word I was looking for. It's been a long week, guys. I'm forgetting words over here. Forgetting words.
So I think, I don't know. That's my take. I really feel like the prosecution had a weak case, and the defense didn't. It's that simple. I mean, the defense knew the weak spots of the prosecution's argument. They knew that they had a prosecutor that was overzealous. They knew that there was evidence that they withheld or they tried to suppress. I mean, it seemed like, in the end, it seemed like this was going to be a losing battle.
Yeah. We have questions for you.
Okay. Sure you do.
I mean, but I don't want to interrupt you. You've been preparing for this. You tell me.
That's the gist. That's the gist of my argument. That that I think I think this case is more understandable once you kind of situate the arguments and understand what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, people can disagree with me. People can argue that he pulled the trigger and therefore he should be held accountable. They can argue that he was negligent in terms of gun safety. All that's true. But you could have I mean, it's probably also true on most movie sets. Like, right? Because again, what is the core issue? The core issue is that if there's no live rounds on that set, there's no fatality. I don't know how I can't, for me, there's no way getting past that. And that's what the defense understood. That, by the way, that defense team was extraordinarily astute. Man, were they well prepared. Like, Kerry Morrissey would say one thing, and Alex Spiro would get his staff they would get the information instantaneously to him, so that he could respond and rebut. I mean, that Alex Spiro is a really good attorney, and so you can see this is a case, by the way, too, when you can see how an excellent attorney really makes a big difference. You know, I've worked so many cases with public defenders, and most of them really do their best. Most of them do an excellent job, but they have limited resources. They don't have a staff of 10 people to assist them, and in pulling out all this information. Alex Spiro knew all those statements that Kerry Morrissey made to third parties on the set and off the set. I mean, that's amazing. So she wanted to teach him a lesson, right? Like, that's her having a corroborating person that she said that to, willing to take the stand, is amazing. Yeah, go ahead. This is a great example of how really good attorneys make a huge difference in a case, and really good attorneys that have a strong defense, that would be even more so.
Okay. I think it's time that we do what we do best, though, where I bring the tea and you read the tea leaves. So we've got to move on. We got to just talk some things that happen at trial. People kind of want to know your thoughts on some things that happened at trial. So now that's the moment everybody's been waiting for. So,
and let me before you do that, I want to weigh in a little bit on one of the most touching elements of this trial. I felt was when Alex's wife would comfort him, and when she would come over and whisper in his ear, and they would kind of communicate, and you could tell there's a real bond there. And at the end of the trial, when they were both in tears, talk about a catharsis, right? Like, 3 years of this weighing over them, just all the emotions that entailed, and the possibility of him going to prison. It must have been really hard. But I felt like I don't see in a lot of trials that type of intimacy. And I think there was a real intimacy between Hilaria and Alec, and it was quite moving to me.
Yeah. It was to me as well.
Now onto your tea.
Full circle. Well, which I mentioned the family in the beginning of this. And for those, maybe we should even start with this. I don't know. We guys, I got in a little bit. Maybe we should mention that, the case was dismissed because of a Brady violation and a hiding of evidence. But a lot of things happen at the trial, and there's a lot of things that people are talking about, and they just want to know your thoughts. But first off, I want to pull up a couple things that I want to say that I addressed actually in lives. So I'll say it again. A cardinal rule is never put a gun on someone, except guess who breaks the cardinal rules every day? Movies. How many movies have you seen where guns are pointed at people? So that's confusing for me.
And to add to that, by the way, so one of the pieces of evidence that the defense was going to put on, they talked about this in the opening statement, but there was a script. In the script asked Alec to point the gun, to cock it and point it, and Helena requested to get a certain shot. She requested that the gun be placed in a certain position.
Yeah.
So,
but let's just, people disagree sometimes, there's evidence that is disputing different things, but my point is in general, people point things at people in movies every day. So that's very complicated. It seems like the cardinal rule, unless you're on a movie set.
With the expectation that if you have a gun and it's cold, and it doesn't have a live round.
Yeah. So a nurse doesn't double check medication with another nurse and it kills someone. That's not what happened here. Actually, it would be a nurse that hands the medication. It's actually someone that maybe poisons some medication and tells you it's not poison and gives it to the nurse to give to somebody else. You've got to throw in where do the live rounds come from? Who is responsible for that? A nurse that adds something that's not supposed to be in the medication should be held liable. If that nurse gives it to another nurse and it's labeled correctly and they give it, do you see what I'm saying? Like, at what point down the line? These are the things I've brought up. It's not whose job was it when you're giving somebody a cold gun? If the nurse is given medication that's labeled appropriately, and this is the medication that they're supposed to give to their patient, and then it ends up not being it, I would think is the person that labeled it. Why isn't the family speaking out about this? I mentioned this before. Gloria Allred was there for the parents of Helena Hutchins, and she represented them, and she did speak to me, and she is saying that ALEC Baldwin is not above the law, and she's requesting ALEC Baldwin to reach out to them. That they are heartbroken by this. Ashley asked Dr. John's take on ALEC just walking out of court to get coffee. I mentioned this in my live. That didn't happen. So here is what happened. I was in the courtroom, and then I went down to the press room, and my friends remained in the courtroom. So this is all over the internet. This did not happen. I went back down to the press room, and I did see a moment where ALEC Baldwin walked out. So what did I do? I ran to the hallway to see what was going on. I watched ALEC walk down the hallway and directly to the restroom. I stayed in the hallway. The moment he left the restroom, he walked directly back to court, and somebody handed him the attorney. As he walked, he was almost to the doorway. An attorney handed him that glass with the lid. I don't know if it was water. I don't know if it was coffee. It looked like a coffee cup. It could have been anything. And he kept walking straight back to the courtroom, grabbed the glass, said thank you, and limped back into the courtroom. My friends that remained in court that were on the second row heard ALEC say to his attorney to his right, I need to use the restroom. Can I go? And he was given permission to go. And then Alex Spiro did not see that, and so he looked concerned and confused. But just so everybody knows, this was him desperately needing to go to the bathroom, and you can watch, he was like almost like doing like the shakes like right before he left. He's like, I gotta go. And they gave him permission. He quickly left, and he quickly came back. And it was a very even jurors, one of the jurors left at one point. Like, it was a very, anyway, that is what happened. What I meant by the jurors leaving is the jurors would like hang out in the hallway and in the lobby during breaks too. It was just kind of sort of a casual come and go from the courtroom thing, but he did get permission. Those are just a few things I wanted to cover because they were going fast and people wanting to know. It was interesting to be in the courtroom. People just want to know what you think of Morrissey. Sam Evans is asking what you think. What do you think is going on there? They want to know. I'm looking for Sam Evans' comment, but she said, "What do you think it is?" She mentioned. Well, here it is. But tell us your thoughts. You mentioned, arrogance. But what else did you see with her? I know you can't diagnose, but let's share some thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know her history very well. I mean, whatever's going on with her, she's clearly like overzealous and overexuberant, and she doesn't seem. If you look at let's take the Daybell prosecutors as a contrast. I think a lot of prosecutors understand that if you're going to reach a jury, you need to come across as, I think there has to be some humility. You don't want to come across as being angry and, like whatever the qualities are that lead to persuading a jury. I think she's very intelligent. I think she's, in many ways, she has the qualities of a good prosecutor, but I don't think she's reading the room. and I don't think she's not able to kind of rein in her emotions to such a degree that she's appearing composed and humble and accessible to a jury. So whatever that is, I don't know enough about her to like comment on what it is that's going on there. It does seem to me there's a lot of anger, and that could be so many things. That could be anything. That could be that maybe she doesn't like her job. It could be as simple as that. I don't know. Maybe she feels stuck. Maybe she's frustrated that she didn't go out on her own and start her own law firm. I don't really know. I mean, but it's not particularly becoming to a jury when you have a prosecutor that is so angry and so, amped up.
Yes. Thank you
So
for
I don't
sharing.
know.
A lot of
can't,
people want to know your thoughts on just her in general. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah, as I said, I think as I said earlier, I think there's a fair amount of projection going on. The very qualities that she's accusing Alec Baldwin of exhibiting, and the very qualities that she is saying that she despises in him, she seems to exhibit some of those herself. So it's a classic case of projection. Like those parts of herself that she doesn't want to acknowledge, she's projecting onto him.
Yeah.
And by the way, a prosecutor that does that is not going to be in a position to accurately assess the evidence. This is how you get to prosecutors that overreach, that are overly zealous, because their own personal issues get in the way, because their own biases influence their ability to assess information. They make mistakes, they make bad decisions, and that's exactly what happened here. She felt like this evidence that was never entered, that was never entered into the case as evidence, she determined by herself that it had no meaning, that it didn't have any evidentiary value, but it's not up to her to determine that.
Right.
It's up to the court. It's up to the judicial system to determine what the evidence means. It's up to a jury and a judge. It's up to the triers of fact. So but you can see how potentially someone like her, a prosecutor like her, with these types of qualities might have trouble seeing the evidence more objectively.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It was fun to know that so many hidden gems were watching with us. There was something that I really wanted to bring up because it was a question I had for you. And I'm sorry. Let's see. I also need to. I don't know why this comment is covering some of my face. There we go. I couldn't get rid of it. I was like, I tried. It was about justice, and well, yeah. So, is justice required in an accident? I don't understand. But before you get to that, let's. I want to say, Rebecca Hayes. Here it is. They want someone, or we want someone, or people want someone to pay for her death. And like Lauren said, is that justice or is that revenge? And Rebecca's referring to a live that I did during lunch, where I was sort of asking that question: what does justice look like? And I told John today, that's been something I've been talking about. I understand, justice is a philosophical idea. Revenge is wanting to hurt somebody for what they did to you. And I wanted to ask you, what is the difference, John, between revenge and justice?
Yeah, that's such a big question. I think I would I think let's go back to the Greeks a little bit in answering that question. Well, let me answer the question broadly, and then I'll go back to kind of Greek thought, because I think that's where justice really originates. But justice in general, I think of justice as being communal. So in other words, justice is part of the community and how the community makes laws, implements laws, how they try criminal cases, right? So justice is an ideal. It's about implementing a system of laws that allows for fairness and impartiality in all cases. So the basic idea of justice is an ideal. It's an ideal where everyone is equal under the law, and it's owned by the community. Revenge is much more personal. I think of revenge is more like lawlessness. So if justice is the law, revenge is more idiosyncratic. It's about retribution. It's more ego driven. And I think revenge applies more to the individual. So if I go back and think about Greek thought, that in a lot of the original Greek mythology, there's this idea that revenge and retribution are often paramount. And so you have these people like Agamemnon, who's murdered by his wife at the time, Clytemnestra, to avenge the fact that Agamemnon sacrificed their daughter before he sailed to the Trojan War. He sacrificed I forget how old she was. I think she was like, I don't remember the age, but the daughter, she was a baby. Her name was Iphigenia, and Agamemnon did that so that the Greek fleet could have smooth sailing to Troy. And understandably, Clytemnestra never got past that. So she just murdered him indiscriminately. And then you get in this particular story, then you get a series of like all these revenge plots and murders, and like it's just a bloodbath because every one of these individuals is taking the law into their own hands, and they all want retribution. It's all ego driven. It's all based on avenging and revenge. And so what happens over time as the Greeks move more towards democracy, you start getting situations where power is taken away from, let's say, kings and individuals and these privileged families, and it's put more in the hands of the people. And I think so that's when you start seeing what we now would think of as justice. You start seeing more equality under the law. You start seeing this idea of if you're angry at someone, you can't just go out and kill them. So I think in revenge, there's very much this vigilante quality. Whereas with justice, you're trying to eliminate that element. You're trying to give this ideal to the community, and you're asking the community to figure out, what does this mean? What does justice mean? And communities change and things change over time. And so laws change. Laws are written and rewritten all the time as communities struggle to figure out what justice is. So justice is an ideal. There's no one thing that justice is. It's an aspiration.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. As this mama says, revenge is a toddler not getting what they want. Justice is maturity figuring it out. Yeah, that's what he just said. In a bit better, right?
Yeah, well put. Yeah, we deal with a lot of revenge around here at times. Not too much, but some not toddler, with our kindergartner. So I think it's not just toddlers.
I sort of like this. Maybe when no one's responsible, everyone is. And it brings me back to what you just said about justice being communal. Maybe when we can't figure out who to blame, we all should take on some responsibility to figure out how to not have another Helena Hutchins? Is that working hard to make movie sets safer? Is that
Yeah.
helping to make prosecution and investigations better? What does that do? What could we do when nobody is responsible? What can the community do to bring justice? It's a great thought.
Yeah, and I hope there's some advocacy for reform in the way ammunition is distributed to movie sets, because clearly the way it was done on these sets is, it looks like a high risk situation to me. Now, maybe I don't know what the protocols are exactly, but when you see a group of I don't know how, these roughshod Wild West type characters like Seth Kenny and Thel Reed just, mixing live rounds with dummy rounds and not doing inventories of what they have. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah. It is crazy. Well, thank you for let me just scan it. If there are any other questions. Exactly. Justice needs to be connected to accountability.
Right. And exactly. And revenge. So, right. If you go back to Greek tragedy, oftentimes there's very little accountability with revenge. That somehow, because it lacks the communal aspect, the individuals in power, like the individuals in the house of Atreus, for example, for those familiar with some Greek mythology, there's no accountability. You can just exact revenge at will. The problem with that is that the people on the other side are going to try to get revenge too. So you have this endless cycle of revenge on both sides, and it never ends because there's no accountability. That's right. So when the community implements a set of laws and takes it out of the hands of the individuals, then you start getting accountability.
Yes. Tracy Sixora, thank you so much. I did answer the question that on behalf of her parents, Gloria Allred was there. Daddy Poppins is asking, Dr. John, what is she feeling right now? I assume that what I thought he meant when he wrote this was Carrie Morrissey. I'll tell you something. Okay, guys, I'm going to tell you.
You got some tea here? You got some tea?
Yeah. So I went out last night, Santa Fe. Missed you, babe. I went out. It was fun. We missed you.
You went clubbing? Is clubbing in Santa Fe?
No, I went to the Water Street. Had some delicious green chili. Somebody else asked how my real Mexican New Mexico food was, and it was delicious. I had a Frito pie, green chili Frito pie.
So envious.
Forgive everyone for the Taco Bell that I said I admitted I'd Ubered, and that seemed to upset people more than a lot that I had said. But first off, just to clarify,
let me just say.
Well, I just want to clarify. Okay, no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't know. I'm gonna agree. I know. I'm sorry. Because what you just said there is so upsetting. I'm gonna have to agree with our gem. Like to order Taco Bell in Santa Fe, New Mexico is sacrilegious.
Okay.
No,
I know.
Whatever your explanation is, it's not going to be sufficient.
That's
but I'm listening. I'm listening.
So I get a chance to explain myself. That's the only way for justice. Let me just, at least before everyone crucifies me, like let me give me a chance. I'm going to call myself as a witness. It's my last chance. Here I go. We were hungry. I did not have time to get food. There was a little place where we could walk around the corner and eat. It was delicious. I even bought a beautiful this bracelet from a vendor there. But we could not go anywhere, and we went to Uber Eats, and we needed something that came in about 10 minutes. And Taco Bell was it, and we needed it to get through the day. And you know what? It did not come in time. So there's that too. I grabbed the bag, ran upstairs, put it outside in the hallway, and then we ate it cold like 2 hours later. So I was very grateful for the green chili Frito pie that I was finally able to have. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. My question would be whether does Taco Bell and Santa Fe have a New Mexican twist? In other words, if I order a Taco Bell crunchy taco, does it come with green chili? Or is it just it has to be like uniform, right? Like it's the same taco you'd get anywhere.
I'm looking at, sorry, I got distracted by chats because people are still shaming me. Just like Morrissey, I think I just made it worse by jumping on the stand. I jump on the stand and explain
Yeah.
myself, and they're like, "You did what?" Yeah.
I know. What a missed opportunity. Oh man.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I didn't answer that question, by the way. Someone asked what I thought that Carrie Morrissey was feeling right now. I mean, I'd have to imagine
Daddy Poppins or whatever.
I'd
Great
have
name.
to imagine that she's I mean, I don't know her, but like I think a normal human being in this situation would have to feel some embarrassment. I mean, maybe it's deeper than that. Maybe she's even feeling humiliation. But my guess is that she's probably pretty well defended against those types of vulnerable emotions. So I don't know. If I had to guess what she's feeling, I don't know. Maybe some embarrassment, but probably nothing. Probably just relief that it's over. And she's
Okay.
probably not wanting to process those really vulnerable emotions like embarrassment and shame. That would be my guess.
Yes. Okay. Well, Emily reminded me that I forgot to spill the tea, but this has to do with it. It's so let's back to me going out last night. There was a great group of us, a lot of us hanging out. I ran into a lot of different people, and most everything is off the record. I'll just say that Santa Fe is a small town when you gather on a Saturday night. But there was one person who knew Carrie Morrissey, and that's all I'll say. And this person was actually asked this question: what's she thinking now? And this person said she doesn't give an F. She doesn't care at all. She's waking up this morning just fine, and she doesn't give an F. That's what this person who knows
Okay, and that
who knows and likes Carrie Morrissey stated to me.
so
while
that by the way, I wish you had told me that earlier because that helps a lot in assessing Carrie Morrissey. But you have to wait till the very end to give me that little tidbit.
I bring the tea, you read the tea leaves. You interrupted me. I was saying I've got tea, and you were like, "Hold up, no! First, we got to
Okay.
like shame you, and then I've got to say my opinion." And so you know,
I'm gonna revise the person who asked what is she feeling. I'm gonna revise it and say absolutely nothing. That this woman that apparently she has no capacity to feel vulnerability and embarrassment. So I'll revise it now and say apparently absolutely nothing. I will say this: I'm glad that Alec Baldwin expressed remorse for the loss and empathy, and right. So in that sense, he's way ahead of her.
yeah. Sam, it was not that cafe. It was on Water Street. I went to. I just forgot the name of it, but it was delicious. Coyote Cafe, I think was the name. Troublemaker Baker. I knew it. I know I'm in the massive minority, but I rather love Carrie Morrissey. Well, there you go. This person I spoke to was a friend of Carrie Morrissey. So she also has friends. Now we know too. Carrie Morrissey has friends, and they were out last night hanging out with me. And
that's harsh. Yeah. Well, I'm glad to know she has at least one friend.
Well, two now. Our moderator, Troublemaker Baker.
Oh yeah. Well.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Coyote Cafe. All right. Okay. And then the place I was last night, I'm not gonna say because I'll just say there were several. I just can't believe how everybody showed up in one place. I did not know that happened in Santa Fe after court. I'll just say we even got a ride home with Alec Baldwin's Uber driver. I mean, everything. I saw everyone last night. We got so much tea. I can't share it all. I'll share a little bit more on our Patreon live. And then we got a ride home and we recognized the car because it was the one Alec Baldwin's family had been that hired. So Santa Fe, man. It's a tight-knit town, and everyone that was at court seemed to go to the same place last night, including Carrie Morrissey's friend. All right. All right. It's true, Sam. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful city. I loved Santa Fe. I loved meeting Gems from Santa Fe. I love your city. I love New Mexico. It was very hard to leave to come back. But the only reason I did is because I love you more. So here I am. Austin, you around interrupting you again.
I'm glad you're here. Thank you for coming home. I love you too. So
Okay.
are
So
we
we're
gonna
head. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna wrap up with a few final thoughts. If are we at that point? I think we're at that point, right? So
We're at that point for the few final thoughts. Happy birthday tomorrow one more time.
thank you. Yeah, I'm someone that, I resist celebrating my birthday because it's just another reminder of my mortality. So I don't really get how people are ecstatic over birthdays, because I'm like, look, the clock's ticking and my birthday reminds me of it. And being reminded of my mortality is a lesson I try to take to heart all the time, because I know that our time is so limited. And that gets me into my final thoughts here, which is about grief and loss. And I want to end with a quote and some thoughts about. So Antigone is a famous play by Sophocles. It's a Greek tragedy, and one of my favorite lines from Antigone is, quote, "Grief teaches the steadiest minds to waver." Grief. So in other words, it's exactly what we talked about. Grief and loss cut human beings to the quick. Grief and loss render us oftentimes helpless and powerless. And I think that's what, when you really get down to it, I think that's what this is about. This is about a tragic loss that's almost inexplicable. I believe it's an accident. It's a horrible accident. And I think that sometimes during these situations, there's this tendency for human beings to point the finger and blame other people and to scapegoat as an attempt to reverse that loss, or at least to manage that loss and that grief. And I think that's what you're seeing here. And I mean, obviously, that's an illusion. There's no managing loss. There's no turning back time. Right? Grief is such a difficult emotion. And I think that's, to a large degree, that's what's going on here. And that's why the prosecution brought this case. They probably shouldn't have. They actually, there were initial charges that were dropped. And I think that's because maybe they recognize some of these issues. And so in that sense, my takeaway here would be that some of the lessons of Greek tragedy for me, and I love Greek tragedy. I read Greek tragedy over and over, by the way. Some of the lessons of Greek tragedy for me are humility. So if the fatal flaw is hubris, then the antidote to hubris is humility. And the other thing I think that's really critical for both this case and in Greek tragedy is this idea of acceptance of loss. That sometimes accidents occur. There's nothing we can do about it. To me, I gave an example last week of a child darts out into the road. A 2-year-old darts out into the road, and a car's coming, doesn't see the child, hits the child. It's horrible, but it's an accident. And everyone's harmed by that. And I don't know, in this case, I don't know what to do about that. But I do know that one of the lessons of Greek tragedy is that as difficult as it is, sometimes acceptance of our losses is the only way out, rather than rage and anger, right, and defiance, and I don't know, some of the things we saw in this particular situation. So those are my final thoughts for tonight.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you to those generous gifts tonight, all of you. We really appreciate it. I add to the people that said, but we're grateful you were born. And yes, so I agree with that. And tomorrow we celebrate 8 years. So we're done with the 7-year itch. Onto 8.
Right. I'm sorry. Happy anniversary. I need to mention that. We're not there yet, but if we can hold out for a few more hours, well, we can hold out. If you don't go to the courthouse tonight and file papers, we'll celebrate our anniversary tomorrow. So I'm expecting to.
And if anybody's wondering if I can do that, I absolutely can in Las Vegas, because we're having a 24/7 system here for those that want to get drunk and then head to a chapel. It's a big part of our economy here. So you've got 24/7 courthouses. You can show up at 2 a.m. and start the process. So I will not do that.
I think we'll be okay, but you did say you went clubbing in Santa Fe last night, so
I didn't go clubbing. That was what they said in chat. I did not go clubbing. I said I went out. By going out, I went to a place. I have to say place because I don't want, I went somewhere with a bunch of people. It was a restaurant and place. Yeah. There was one more question I wanted to answer, because someone said, and I want to answer this because it's something that I respect. Someone asked, what do you think Alec Baldwin will do? Will he stay quiet? And I want to say something that he's already done that I value, and I thought it was good. That as this case was dismissed because, and the prosecution made to look terrible, and it was just, in my opinion, sorry, friend of Carrie Morrissey, who doesn't think it seemed that bad. They thought Erlinda Johnson looked worse. I was like, okay, I'm just listening. It was just, you got a friend in me, Carrie. This person was loyal to her. But in my opinion, she didn't look good. The media had set up tons and tons of microphones for a press conference for him. And at that moment, Alec Baldwin could have done to Carrie Morrissey what Carrie Morrissey had been doing to Alec Baldwin. And he could have gone out there to all those microphones and he could have said, this is a win. I never deserved these charges. I'm so happy. This was been such a wrong course for 3 years. We're grateful. But he came out of the courthouse, and he and Hilaria and Elizabeth and Beth and Stephen, they all walked, and even his attorneys, Alex, Spiro, everyone, they walked right past the microphones and into the car. And I don't think there was a better thing they could have done for Helena Hutchins too, because there is nothing to celebrate. Yeah. And if he had wanted to say something, and if he wanted to stick it to the prosecution for what they'd been doing and what Carrie Morrissey's been doing to him for the last 3 years, he would have stood there and had his moment. And he didn't. He quietly went into his car and drove away. And in my opinion, I think that's how they're going to handle it and how it should be handled. Because again, at the end of this, nobody wins. Helena Hutchins' life is gone. Her boy does not have a mother. And that was the right thing to do. And Alec Baldwin did not do what Carrie Morrissey did to him.
Right. And that gets back to what I just said about humility and acceptance of loss and limitations.
Yes. You can do more with silence. sometimes with words. All right, guys. Thank you, Tad, for putting this in here. We are going to be on Patreon right after this. John, do you need a bathroom break? Do you need to pull an Alec Baldwin real quick before we go live over there? Or can we just say we'll go right over? We're going to just
Yeah, I'm not drinking coffee this late for sure. So yeah, a little break, a few minutes, and we'll be right back.
Okay, and so for those that are wanting to join us, and I will be able to, if for those wanting to ask like a little bit more particular questions about the courtroom or anything, or just anything, we'll invite you on to ask questions. So yeah, we'll just take a little bit of an intermission, and then you can join us. It is pinned in the description of this video and in chat. So we'll see you guys in just a second. Bye.
Okay. Good night.